My name is Laura Thomas. I'm a member of Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Congregation, and I'm also the co-chair of the Social and Environmental Action Committee, along with Nancy Vanderplatz. And it's been a joy for both of us to work together with Leah Radcliffe-Ross from Danforth Jewish Circle and Karen Somerville from East End United. And we created the speaker series, and we have done other projects together in the Danforth Multifaith Commons. So when members of the Social and Environmental Action Committee at Neighborhood met to decide our topic for this evening, what emerged was a deep concern for how we can better sustain our energies in doing this activism. How can we find more fulfillment and more joy in doing this work, particularly in climate activism? And we're so pleased to welcome today our two speakers, Sally Ludwig and Megan Breau, who will be sharing their experiences and ideas as activists and their unique perspectives. So in tonight's program, we will have a dialogue between our moderator, Tony Rapoport, and Sally and Megan, and there will be a creative exercise for all of us to participate in, followed by some discussion.
I just wanted to say very, very briefly a little bit more about Danforth Multifaith Commons, which is our host for this evening. The Danforth Multifaith Commons is actually the name given to the formal partnership between the Danforth Jewish Circle, East End United Regional Ministry, and Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Congregation. It's a partnership that's grounded in a shared building at Eastminster Church on the Danforth, but it's also based on years of collaboration between the three congregations and other congregations here in the East End. And it's based in a lot of shared values, despite coming from different faiths. So tonight's event is really a celebration of that partnership, and hopefully gives us some hope for future collaboration and activism together.
So I would like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live, learn, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Mississauga, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. And we acknowledge that we have an obligation to learn about building right relationships with all peoples. With that obligation to learn comes the obligation for action. In the Truth and Reconciliation Report, there are calls to action focused on church parties who were part of the settlement agreement, but the principles referenced in the calls relate to all spiritual groups. We need to develop strategies for congregations to learn about their roles in colonization and the history and legacy of residential schools. And we need to create opportunities for relationship building. We have hosted a learning session on Indigenous peoples and the justice system, a virtual tour of the Mohawk Institute Residential School, and we are planning a Kairos blanket exercise in the fall. And moving forward, we are hoping to enhance our relationships with our local Indigenous community. We welcome you here this evening, and also we welcome your participation in helping us implement the calls to action. Thank you. Over to Laura.
Yes, thanks, Karen. I would like to now introduce Tony. Tony Rapoport is a longtime member of Neighborhood Congregation and a passionate climate activist, very dedicated to going out to rallies, and he's done a lot of work with 350.org. Tony, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. And thanks so much to both Karens and to Liat and to the Danforth Multifaith Commons. And welcome to everybody. I'm really glad you could make it this evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two wonderful speakers for this evening, Megan Breau and Sally Ludwig. Megan is a high school student and youth climate justice activist and organizer with Fridays for Future Toronto. She finds it very difficult to manage activism along with all of the other responsibilities of a teen, school, work, relationships, and her well-being. Her involvement in the climate justice movement is fueled primarily by fear and anger towards the climate crisis and those responsible for it. Climate anxiety is a real feeling, and she tries her best to inspire her activism by channeling that anxiety into action. However, that's easier said than done. Cycles of burnout are common in activism spaces, and sometimes it's hard to find the joy in activism. Ultimately, what keeps her going as an organizer is her fellow youth activists, friends, and their allies. Together, they are pulling those in power to act towards a climate-safe future while simultaneously holding each other up and strengthening the movement. Sally Ludwig is a facilitator of the Work That Reconnects and a student of Joanna Macy. The ideas and group processes of this body of work have power to sustain activists, students, ecotherapists, and other community members during this critical planet time. Before retiring, she worked as a relational therapist, group facilitator, consultant, and educator. As a co-founding member and trainer in the transition movement in Canada, she is particularly interested in the inner dimensions of systemic transformation. She's nourished by music making and collaborative improvisation, her backyard permaculture food forest, and companionship with human friends and the more than human world. A story she chooses to live by is this: people working together, each contributing their unique gifts, passions, and skills, can unleash the intentions, talents, and collaborative energies to create a livable future for ourselves, our descendants, and all beings yet to come into life. So I'd love to invite Megan and then Sally to just say a little bit more about your life, your activism, whatever you'd like to expand on at this point. Megan, you want to go first?
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. So Tony said most of it in my introduction, but I currently organize with Fridays for Future Toronto. I also organize with Climate Strike Canada, which is the organizational network of all of Canada for the youth climate justice organizations. And I've definitely bounced around in a few other organizations, different campaigns. I like to help out wherever I'm needed. My activism journey really started at a young age. I didn't consider it activism at the time. Being called a climate justice activist is definitely something I had to adjust to because I feel like I've been doing this work my whole life. So in elementary school, I hosted a lot of campaigns, food drives, money drives, bullying awareness sessions, etc. Basically, any issue I had the opportunity to learn about or any social justice opportunity I took, and I still stand by that. Any opportunity I get to learn more or help anyone out, I'll take it. So in 2019, when climate strikes started happening more frequently in Toronto, I saw a poster up on my way to school. And I'd heard about climate justice a little bit. I knew that ice caps were melting and plastic was a problem, which I'm sure most of us know now that it's a lot more than that, right? But funny enough, I joined Fridays for Future Toronto because my parents didn't want me to miss school to go to a climate strike. So I reached out to FFTO and I'm like, I'm not allowed to miss school. How it's gonna help? And then I became an organizer, and now I'm one of the organizers that are planning the strikes and mobilizing youth to strike from school. So a little full circle moment there. Yeah, and I've been organizing with Fridays for Future Toronto for about 2 years, as well as Climate Strike Canada.
Thank you, Megan. So I'd love to hear that. Sally, you want to say a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Megan. That was so neat to hear from you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. My time of trying to work for positive change in the world, which I guess I now think of as activism, goes back a long way. Since I became aware during my 20s, we're talking the 1970s and even before that in high school times in the late 60s, became aware of the military and political situation that was Vietnam War days and of the environmental situation. There was a real awakening at that time of what human industrial society is doing to Earth. I learned about systemic thinking early on and took that forward all the way. I learned about permaculture earlier. Also, I was exposed then to Buddhist thought and other Eastern ideas as interpreted for Westerners, and to indigenous wisdom. And I had a sense all from childhood of being a child of the earth and being close to nature, and that's still what sustains me now. And I had the opportunity to move. I was one of the Back to the Landers, to move to the woods of northern Michigan, where I lived for several years, very close to the land. It was wonderful. Nature all around, hoping to transform society by refusing my participation in what I now think of as industrial growth, capitalist, predatory economy. That was a terrific time with organic gardening, being with compost and the direct relations with the water, but it lacked human community. And through a long story, I ended up coming to Guelph, where I live now, and trained for work as a therapist, always interested in healthy relationships and how to support people in being with reality and being with trauma and its effects and cultivating resilience to trauma. And that's certainly relevant to all of us now, is just looking with eyes open at what's going on in the world. It's traumatizing just as we go along. I ran into the Work That Reconnects, which was a life-changing, and I'll be talking more about that body of work as we go on. In the transition movement, Tony, you mentioned, finding out about that movement turned out to be a way for me to move my work with relationship building to the community scale rather than the scale of couples and families and individual. And my partner and I dove right in with another friend and started Transition Guelph here. And as you said, I became a trainer for transition. It's a ground up movement that everyone can take part in, and it's focused on building community resilience and moving to a post-carbon economy in a whole lot of ways. So I got to participate in fantastic projects. And I don't want to take a long time, but just to mention there's still Transition Toronto and in other locations going on, and there are projects in gardening and agriculture and food distribution and new economy, things like the tool library, time banks. Our group put on a resilience festival every spring, and now there have been offshoots from that movement, like, for example, a business now that some members have started building cold cellars in people's homes and on farms. I've really valued the non-hierarchical distributed leadership model that the transition movement goes by, and I want to foster that. My focus has been inner transition, which I got to share a lot of good material, good of ideas and processes with people, and helped folks be with the awareness and the despair and sorrow and anger that can so readily come with knowing what we see happening in the world. Other things that have helped, just in brief, are making art, taking up membership in the queer community with my trans partner, local actions, ultra local, small scale, and also participating in larger scale actions. I've been a member of 350.org. The Green Party Extinction Rebellion was quite active here for a time in Guelph, and also Fridays for Future. I was out in front of City Hall, Megan, every Friday. I'm also interested now, some of you may know, have run across deep adaptation movement. I think that's an important one also for our time. And now, most recently, I'm a member of a co-housing startup, which is a really exciting way to experiment with an old and new way that people can live together and create a mutually supportive society together. That's me.
Thanks, Sally. Such a a rich range of activities and inspiring ideas that come out of your story. So I really appreciate that. So speaking for myself, I get a huge lift out of being around people like you, Megan, and you, Sally. So I feel really up right now, simply just hearing what you have to say and connecting, and also realizing that there's quite a few people here who have tuned in order to participate, and so that's all really feels really good to me. However, at the risk of bringing us down, at least temporarily, I want to read an excerpt from a new book by Britt Ray called Generation Dread. It's in the bookstores now, and I'm just going to read a short excerpt. Kind of set I think the stage for the challenge that we're trying to address here. In 2021, my colleagues and I conducted a survey that looked at climate anxiety in 10,000 young people aged 16 to 25 in 10 countries around the world: Nigeria, Philippines, India, Brazil, Portugal, Australia, the United States, France, Finland, UK. 45% said that their feelings about climate change negatively affect their daily life and functioning. This could include eating, concentrating, work, school, sleeping, spending time in nature, playing. Ecological dread is, of course, not limited to the young. Many older folks who are in touch with their environmental identity also feel wrecked by the unraveling they had to witness over their lifetime. Climate anxiety occurs across generational divides, and it is marked especially clearly where racial and class privilege intersect. So, with that as a background, and with our own personal experience to also guide us, what would the two of you have to say about, do you recognize those feelings in yourself? When do they come up? And what is it that not so much what to do about them right now, but what just to say how we experience those things?
I don't think climate anxiety is a really appropriate term. It's fear and terror and dread, and those are very real. And calling it anxiety, which is a kind of a psychologizing term, to my mind has an effect of diminishing that. Oh, it's just anxiety, you should be able to do this, do that, and get over it. No, we need that fear. It's important to what's going on right now. I really filter for myself the news that I take in, but there are several good organizations whose opinions I more or less trust. And so just being aware of what's happening in the world politically, in Canada, as well as in our neighbor to the south, where people often point. And the environmental impacts of what's going on, and the pace of that economy, just looking at all of those things. And now, of course, there's war making and the threat of, better publicized war making. There have been wars going on right along the way. And the existential threat of nuclear disaster. So having eyes open brings in trauma all the time, I think.
Yeah, I think those statistics you shared are really eye-opening, because personally I see the climate despair and the climate anxiety everywhere, but that's just because I'm in an organizing space. So I talk about these things with my fellow organizers, but it's really interesting to hear how many people have those same feelings, and the way that everyone is still expecting us to go on business as usual. I'm still expected to go to school every day, and it's a big deal when I strike one day from school to go to a climate strike. And I'm not saying everything has to pause so that we can help combat this climate crisis, but I think we really need to have more of an understanding about the weight that we're carrying, and we should stop ignoring it and maybe lean into it more, use that fear and that anxiety and turn it into action. And that's what really keeps me going. I don't know what I would do without an organizing outlet, and being a part of Fridays Future Toronto. I don't know what I would do with all of this information and living in the middle of so many intersecting crises without having such an amazing support group and outlet to organize. And we definitely have that here in Toronto. So
It makes sense to me that from what you said that your connection with other organizers is in a way a source of more sort of contact with the problems. Like you become aware of it because of conversations with them, but it's also the source of how you feel you can handle it. Am I right that it's kind of both?
Yeah, it's a very interesting loop. It kind of feels like, we're all organizers, we're all just trying to like urge politicians, world leaders into like climate action. One person falls down, they get really burnt out from an action, there's another person pulling them back up. As you mentioned when you're introducing me, just the cycles of burnout. It's really sad to say, but it's true. There are really common cycles of burnout. So like one organizer is feeling really anxious that day about the climate crisis, or is feeling down, has very low capacity. There's other organizers that are there to pull them back up. So it's a great community for sure.
I sometimes think about the fact that there are lots of people out there who have awareness of the issues we're facing, but don't actually take that step of getting involved, at least in any kind of obvious way. And I kind of wonder about that. Any thoughts about, like, do you think part of it is that getting involved actually increases the worry to some extent because it gets reinforced by the people who you come in contact with? Or
I think to get through life day to day, a lot of people push away the awareness that they have that comes to them, but people have such a sense that they can only get by, and I'll own this for myself too at times. It can seem like too much to take in, and the society that we live in teaches us, I think, that we're powerless to do much about it. And we're so small, we're isolated beings. And so thinking and really feeling what the emotions that go with those thoughts becomes something that just feels hurtful with no positive outcome. So I think people avoid the really looking the feelings and the knowledge in the face. And in part because people don't have community of organizers, of others they can talk to who get it. There's nowhere to go with that. So much of the world, business as usual, Megan, you called it, just goes on and on like nothing's wrong. And so a person who's paying attention to the harms can feel kind of nuts, can feel like, am I the only one? What's red, or what's going on here with everyone?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you brought up. I wonder about that too. I have actually had multiple conversations with my sister and friends and people I'm close with, people that aren't active in the climate movement, and I've been like, hey, like, why don't you care? Not in like a way to call them out, like, why aren't you doing anything about it, but just trying to really understand where that gap is. Because as an organizer, I'm always thinking about how can I mobilize more people? How can I get more people involved? How can I support the movement, right? So I'm always asking my sister and my friends just to kind of understand where that gap is. How is it that we're all fed the same information, but not all of us are as inclined to fight for climate action? And the one thing that kind of occurs every single time, and the conclusion every time that I come to, is that our brains are not able to process a threat this large. A lot of people really do not understand what the stakes are, and that when scientists say we have this many years to fight against this climate crisis and we have to decrease emissions, people don't understand we actually have to do that, right? Especially because growing up, we're taught that these systems and these leaders that are causing the climate crisis are also the ones that are going to save us from it. So I think, simply put, a lot of people just aren't able to kind of process the threat and understand that we are really the ones that have to save ourselves.
Yeah, it's scary to really look the facts in the face and to look the future in the face. also, our brains aren't very well wired to adapt to challenges that seem far away and that seem to have a long timeline. Up until recently, it has seemed through the media and so on that the threats of climate disruption are kind of remote in time and in other places in the world. That's changing fast now. Along with this, I wonder if the crises that we're facing now aren't going to mean that a lot more people will mobilize.
From mobilizing people, I mean, it's very clear both on the global level and also here in Canada and in Toronto that Fridays for Future is the organization that has really succeeded in mobilizing large numbers of people. Before the pandemic, we had tremendous strikes of young people, and the fact that they took place on a Friday and young people had to take time off school in order to do it made it all the more impressive. And there were calls back in 2019 for adults to join, and certainly many of us did, but not in the kinds of numbers that the youth did. So Fridays for Future is so far the organization that has really led the way in terms of having those conversations, somehow engaging with people who aren't necessarily actively organizing, but who are willing to show up. They're willing to head for some central place in their community and be visible. And clearly that's needed. But how does it feel to actually be involved when that movement is growing, when large numbers of people are showing up?
It feels really nice to see the movement grow, to see new members join Fridays for Future Toronto, and especially coming out of the pandemic or out of the thick of it. We're still in the pandemic. To see more people come out to the streets. But at the same time, it really doesn't feel like I've been a part of this movement so long. It feels like I'm jumping from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. And it's not as glamorous as it look. I feel like a lot of my friends, their understanding of being a climate justice organizer is you show up to a strike, you hold a poster, make an Instagram post, right? That's what a lot of them see. But it is really exhausting and tiring behind the scenes. And some of the most rewarding experiences are when corporations that you're targeting for divestment or politicians are frantically writing back a tweet to talk about their net zero plans.
Yeah. To have an effect, to be able to see some effect, and to see legislation change, and to see insurers stop insuring tar sands expansion and all of those things, it's really, really enheartening. I feel also great when I see new people become active who haven't in the past. And I know that how much that means for folks, because day to day in the economic situation that so many are in, people are pressed with children, trying to pay the bills, keep everything going, find housing now, and all of those pressures, besides the regular day-to-day pressure that tells us, don't look over there at these disasters, just keep working, stay in the capitalist system. I feel very privileged that I'm retired now, and my time I can spend differently. And I recognize for a lot of people who aren't in that kind of position, for them to come out and give their time is all the more meaningful.
Lots of terrific things being brought up there. But since you mentioned it, Sally, there's no doubt that there's an aspect of privilege for many of us who get involved because we can afford the time, we can afford the giving the attention to something that's not meeting our immediate needs, but trying to look after longer term or larger needs. And so certainly there's privilege associated with that. But how does that intersect with the attempt to bring attention to justice issues? Because we talk about climate justice now, really trying to connect the fate of the whole planet with the fate of communities that are under stress and under attack. So how does that go together?
I'm really encouraged to see more awareness that they do go together. They're intimately linked. along with environment, along with the fate of the oceans, along with climate for sure, and the systems of oppression and extraction that are ruining people's lives and the land in so many ways. They are totally connected. And for a long time, I think they've been dealt with kind of in silos by separate organizations. So the awareness now that's growing that it's the large systems, it's the economic systems and political economy that are driving this whole thing and causing the problems. As you said, Megan, they're connected, they're coming from the same place. And so I think there's more and more attention toward what's the source of these problems? How do we go to the source? And the efforts for things like divestment, I think, are part of that awareness.
Yeah, again, I think it's at least from what I saw, it was really Fridays for Future that led the way in terms of a large environmental organization insisting that their demands were going to include Indigenous sovereignty demands and workers' demands and anti-racism demands. And that was something that when it first came up, I've always personally I've been a sort of a kind of a justice-oriented person for a long time. So for me, those ideas were very familiar, but it still kind of surprised me when Fridays for Future decided to put them on an equal footing and saying this is what we're going to be striking about back in 2019. And I kind of was thinking to myself, wow, that's really great. But after all, they're young idealists. Maybe they think they can do that, but it's going to alienate people. But actually, the movement just grew because of it. So it seemed to be very courageous and really led the way, because I don't think that there are many environmental organizations that don't talk that way now.
Mm-hmm. Tony, do you think that along in those early times of people drawing those connections, that Idle No More was a movement that had a powerful effect to getting people to understand the interlinked problems, and then the Standing Rock actions as well, that all drew those links between the people, the land, the health of the economy, the whole thing.
We have had 500 years of that activism, and it's never gone away, and it's been influential all that time. So that's where our ideas come from. Now, Sally, I think that a lot of the work that you've described is more on the direct community building level. So do you want to go into that a little bit more? Because I think that partly it seems to me that that's ways of making a difference in building a better world. And also probably it's partly a matter of creating community in the lives of the people who are doing the work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're very, very right on both of those points. One of the things that drew me to the transition movement, which is the strong and international community building movement, was the idea from the founder, the quote, he said, if we wait for governments to do the right things, it'll be too little too late. And if we wait for corporate leadership to do the right thing, it'll be too little too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little, not enough. But if we can band together and act as communities, in some ways it might be just enough and just in time. I'll say a little bit about why I see that as so important, in part because of the dire state of the way things are going, the directions that we're on, and the failures to really shift trajectory on emissions and on all of the climate justice related issues. Is so slow, seems futile at times. It's all the more important to keep on going with the efforts, and at the same time, I think, prepare to go with the changes, adapt to a less rich world, a world with reduced life forms and biodiversity, reduced quality of life in terms of air, drinkable water, all of those things. And so to do that on the level of communities, to get to know people's neighbors and build security together, to know who is going to need assistance in our neighborhood and who has resources to offer. And along with that kind of preparedness aspect, to really get to know each other better is so important, because if, who knows, when disasters happen, they're happening more all over the world, those people right close to us are going to be there, and we're going to want to support each other. So if we already have some of those things in place and have local level systems in place to meet basic needs, we're going to be in a much better situation. It really feeds the spirit too, to get to know other people who care and who are willing to do things in their own life. What else can I tell you about that community building? It goes into all areas of life, and there are lots of rich opportunities for people to engage if they would like to know each other, and to be in a group of people who, like I said, who get it and who understand what we're facing in some respect. You know, everyone doesn't see things totally the same, but who can face those facts and then take whatever actions they can on the home and neighborhood scale to make life possible in the face of all that. I think is so valuable and deserves a lot of attention.
Megan, does that strike a chord with anything you've been thinking about, or that the people you know have talked about?
Yeah, I think working together as a community is awesome because, you know, like I mentioned before, one person falls down, they're burnt out from organizing, next person pulls them back up. So it's great in terms of support and all the things that Sally mentioned, but it also makes sense strategically if we're talking about real change. You hear it in the climate strikes all the time. The power of the people are stronger than the people in power. And that truly makes sense because, I mean, for example, the provincial elections are coming up, I believe. And everyone that sits in office are voted in. Therefore, if our voice is stronger, we collectively come together, we can then vote in people that will be climate leaders. So strategically, if we come together with one common goal, one common voice, we can make change. Another example, when we talk about the banks movement, it's taken a spotlight within the past year within the climate movement and with the youth climate justice movement, trying to urge major banks to divest. And banks are for the people when we're talking about for-profit banks, RBC, BMO, CIBC, Scotiabank, and TD. Are for-profit banks in Canada, if together we all come together and we say, no, you're not investing in fossil fuel projects anymore, they have no choice but to listen because these banks do not have a company, they don't have any money, they have no profit if we don't allow them to. So strategically, it's a smart move to work together because the power of the people are stronger than the people in power.
Yeah, I really like the inclusion of all scales of activity here and all scales of connection, one-to-one with people to try to raise awareness of what's happening, all the way to the international and the national actions. We need all that, yep.
Now, is there with the internet, and actually accelerated by the pandemic, we've had a lot of our lives have gone online. And that means there's potential and the opportunity to create community across very vast distances mediated by the technology. But then there's a lot of things that are done with physical community. And I think that Sally, you were really talking about building things locally and getting to know the people who are nearby, who you may need to rely on in a disaster, but who also sustain you every day. So what about the relationship between remote technologically mediated community and physical immediate community? How does it intersect with either of your experiences?
They do intersect. I'm part of several online groups, communities, attend events. I don't participate in some of the things that you can speak to, Megan, like Instagram and Reddit and those kinds of social media. In fact, I've withdrawn from Facebook in disapproval of them. I find that the online groups are valuable for finding shared values, shared commitments and perspectives. Also for education, it can be great. Zoom is terrific for seminars and webinars and learning and asking questions. Even things like music groups can happen online. And I've been happily surprised by how satisfying some of those disembodied online interactions can be. At the same time, they don't include much unless special attention is given to embodied experience, to sensory experience. They tend to use the verbal and the cerebral almost exclusively and leave out a whole lot of life and of our lives together.
Yeah, I think online spaces are hugely important, especially within the youth movement, because everyone my age has grown up on social media. I think we owe a big thanks to Instagram and all of these social media platforms for how large this movement has grown, because we wouldn't be able to connect with all of these other youth activists from all over the world if it wasn't for these online spaces. It's not uncommon for me to be sitting on a call from someone across the country, sometimes from a place I've never heard about. And because of this, we've really been able to create a really strong front. And as an organizer in Toronto, it's really important to have these connections internationally, because a lot of these headquarters and hubs of big oil and gas companies are located in Toronto. The financial district is located in downtown Toronto. So we often get calls to action from places internationally. A campaign that I worked on and a fight that's still going on is against Recon Africa, which is a Canadian oil and gas company that is currently drilling in the Okavango Delta in Namibia. So I was working with people in Namibia, and we had a duty, and I had a duty as an organizer here in Toronto to do something, because their headquarters is located in downtown Toronto. So these organizing spaces are so important, because we, like, especially in Toronto, right? Because we have all the headquarters here.
Wonderful to hear. That's a powerful experience. Probably shouldn't take too much time in this part of it, but I would love to get, if you have any thoughts about something that's from a kind of a different angle, but I think it's part of our sustainability and spirit discussion, and that is where do the ideas or the inspirations come from? I know that it can come from other people and from the work and from fear, various places. What about how to understand our lives and our connections together? For instance, I've been intrigued by the idea of Gaia, the idea of the Earth as a living thing, and there's a scientific theory as well as sort of a spiritual orientation towards thinking about the Earth as a living being that we're a part of. Is that something that you come in contact with, or are there other kind of perspectives that maybe are outside the ordinary that might have inspired you at times, either of you?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ideas and inspiration that I have is just comes from sitting on calls and meetings from different people, such as this one, really just engaging in as many different spaces and conversations as I can, and just diversifying my own perspectives, and kind of just thinking to myself, which ones do I relate to? And I think that's really helped me grow as a climate activist and help me understand different perspectives as well.
I really relate to the Gaia theory, no longer hypothesis. The reality of Earth as a living being has been totally apparent, obvious to people in so many cultures aside from our own and apart from our own. It's been a forgotten fact that now people are waking up to again through science, and also through some of the traditions of Eastern thought and philosophy. Buddhist teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh is a prime example, are very clear, and Joanna Macy is super clear about the fact that we are interconnected. In fact, none of us is an isolated fragment, individual being, but instead we interexist. All of our lives depend on all the lives around us. So those kinds of philosophical and religious traditions that teach unity of the whole. And for me, systems thinking has for a long time informed my knowledge of my belief that every action can affect every other action, ripple through the entire systems in ways that we can't know and can't predict. And so I find it inspiring to think that no actions are lost. We may not know what the effects are, they may be small or large, but they keep going, they ripple out and have effects that we into the future. I'll talk a bit about the Work That Reconnects ideas about the unity of all life and all existence as we go ahead. But that for me has been a foundational body of thought that really gives the lie to the narratives of this society that tell us that we're separate from Earth, we're separate from nature, our job is to extract for our benefit and make the most of profit in our lives. So the Gaia ideas and and also moment-to-moment awareness of that, bringing mindful attention to our sense experience as we breathe, as we look at nature, as we look at each other's faces, really serves that same inspiring purpose.
Well, thank you, Megan and Sally, for those answers to my kind of left field question, because I think there's a lot to think about and a lot of sources that you both referred to. So I think in the next part, Sally, I think you're going to lead a discussion on dimensions of activism.
I would love to do that. Yeah, thank you. So this will be a section of me for about, 10 minutes probably. Several of you in the Commons, the Multifaith Commons, are familiar with the Work That Reconnects, including several of the organizers for today's events. And so you folks kindly invited me to share some of parts of the ideas and the practices of the Work That Reconnects. It's a body of work developed by Joanna Macy and her colleagues. Joanna is, you may know, is a scholar, an eco-philosopher, a student and teacher of the connections of living systems theory and Buddhist thought, and a long-time, decades-long activist, all the way from anti-nuclear demonstrations early on to the continuing to the present day. The Work That Reconnects invites us into a journey, a spiral journey of experience, a cycle that we can recognize as we go through day to day, through longer periods, like say an intensive workshop, like some that I've been able to attend, through parts of our lifetimes, and even moment to moment. Karen, could we have the first slide, please? Here's there it is. Yeah, thanks, Karen. Here's a graphic representation of the map of this cycle. We call it a spiral journey. Not sure if you're, there we go. Thanks, Karen. I wasn't sure if you were aware there. So you can see at the root is gratitude. The Work That Reconnects. Let me mention to it before I go on, I brought notes because there are several important things I want to say here. So please bear with me as I look away from all of you for the time being. So this work starts us in gratitude. It invites us to touch in with our sense of being alive, of our gratitude for the miracle of being an embodied being with senses to see the world and hear music and breathe the air. And this gratitude for being alive and for that miracle subverts the narrative, the brainwashing. It resists the brainwashing of us as isolated beings who are insufficient and have very little power. So we can celebrate the miracle together, the pleasures of existence as well as the sorrows. Opening our hearts through gratitude also opens them to face the injustices and the grief that we also take in. And we honor our pain for the world. We honor it, that's the next station on the spiral. We honor the pain by sharing it together in community, supporting one another to give voice to the reality that we are aware of, to speak our own truth. And we respect that pain for the world because it shows us our true identity. And that brings us into the next station, which is seeing with new and ancient eyes. So we recognize through our feeling the hurts of people, of living systems of earth, of the oceans, the atmosphere, the climate, of our fellow beings, that we're not isolated selves. This means that the learnings and strengths and the life energies of all the living beings, of all ancestors, of Gaia herself, are part of us too. So honoring our pain for the world moves us that naturally in this way into seeing with new and ancient eyes. I want to share more about this station on the spiral journey with you today, and then we'll return to the last section of the journey going forth later in our time today. Along the way, in acknowledging and honoring our pain for the world, we realize that feeling grief and fear and being moved to anger and despair and emptiness, all of these are healthy, natural response to the reality. And sharing our truth with others, we see that feelings like this are more widespread than we knew. None of us is the only one. And it's very liberating and heartening to recognize this fact. Joanna Macy says, we feel distress when other beings suffer because at a deep level, we are not separate from them. The isolation that splits us from the living body of our world, she says, is an illusion. And the pain breaks through that illusion to tell us who we really are, end quote. So our empathic suffering unveils reality to show us that we are one with Earth, and we resonate with the experience of all Earth's living beings. Seeing with new and ancient eyes also means looking to the wisdom and the life ways that we want to flourish, and in some cases to recover. Like the indigenous awareness that we belong to the land. The land doesn't belong to any person. And every being is a member of our family, and that we receive gifts from the other beings, and we have responsibilities to them. Part of seeing with these open eyes, with a new and ancient view, is being able to notice what's happening on the side of life, and what Joanna calls the Great Turning. The Great Turning is a story told by those of us who are not willing to let the destruction have the last word. And looking with the new eyes, we can see that profound shifts are happening. In fact, those of us on this call are examples of the shifts. There's a transition from this doomed political economy, this era of violence against people and against nature, to a life-sustaining society that's committed to justice and ecological restoration. We don't know what form this will take, or whether the changes that are needed will happen and become large enough in scale quickly enough to transform this society, or whether they'll develop in subgroups in response to a cataclysm or several cataclysms. There may be pockets of culture to seed the continuation of human society after our times. So from where we stand, the future can't be known. But when we look, although it's not broadcast much in the media, especially the corporate media, don't focus very much on the life-sustaining things that are happening. But we can see when we look that momentum for change is building. We can look on Fridays of the school strikes at all of the young people and older people who are gathered with these same values and same commitments to make a life-sustaining society. The commitment to act for the sake of life on Earth is getting stronger, along with the vision and courage and solidarity to do so. So I'd like to present a way to help us see how this turning toward life is happening. And to help us with it, we can see some different dimensions of the turning, of activism for it. So I want to share 4 dimensions. There could be others. These are not in sequence or in order of importance, but all of them are important and so necessary. Next slide, please, Karen. The first dimension of activism we can call holding actions. And this is what people often mean when we talk about activism. Holding back the machine, getting in the way to slow down the destruction, and saving and protecting what's left in our natural life support systems, in our biodiversity, our human cultures. Holding actions counter the unraveling of our social fabric. They safeguard communities against exploitation and starvation and violence, and maintain cultures, languages, lifeways. Holding actions include repairing the harms and the damage and caring for those hurt and those most disadvantaged by the systems we live in. They include examples of both microactivism and macroactivism on every scale, as we were noting before. The direct actions, confrontation, street demonstrations are holding actions. Also strikes, boycotts, petitions, making donations to activist groups and causes, organizing communities. All of these defend our shared existence and the integrity of life on our planet home. And they're essential. And the time is here for mass participation, as much as we can muster, for holding actions to gain strength and effectiveness. But by themselves, they're not enough. Holding actions can't by themselves bring about a life-sustaining culture. There are a lot of losses and failures and setbacks in this area. And we find that putting our activism only into this dimension can lead to depletion and despair and burnout. So along with stopping the damage and slowing down the damage, we need to replace or transform the destructive systems. Next slide, please. So this second dimension of activism for a livable world, we can call the new ways, the Gaian ways of structuring society and relationships. New modes of living are being created all around us, and many of us are learning from older cultures, rethinking, redesigning the ways that we do things. We can participate in life-giving ways to communicate, to share power and governance, new economies that make sense, agriculture, the production and distribution of food in ways that regenerate rather than extract. Education, business, healthcare, energy production, and more are being changed all around us to fit the way that living systems actually work. These together and more are reinventing civilization, and they might just form the base for humanity to continue in whatever form, in whatever future. But the same thing is true. These new structures by themselves are not enough either. New ways won't survive without deep values and beliefs sustaining them. And this brings us to the third dimension of activism for the Great Turning. Next slide. Yes, this is the shifts in consciousness. This shift arises in our hearts, in our minds, in our philosophy, and our views of reality. Our imagination, our human capacity for empathy, let us shift perspective from that illusion of separation to the reality of interbeing, of connectedness, of mutual dependency. We've seen, for example, in the months of the pandemic, how people have come together. In the movements for justice and resistance to war making, how even in the middle of these divisive politics, many of us have been developing our connected self. we become conscious of the caring and the compassion that are truly at the center of us as human beings. Nature connection also deepens a sense of our true identity as Gaia, as children of the earth, a self that is richer and broader than our separate skin-bound self. This consciousness is a good protection against burnout. See, it's long been asked and pondered among people concerned for a livable future. Should we concentrate on inner change in the spiritual dimension or on outer action? The old ways that some used to see personal development, that we either retreat and work on our inner spiritual growth or on actions in the outer world, ignore the inward and focus on action, this is too limited. Like so many questions, the answer is a both and. We need collective systems change and intra and interpersonal change. Both inner and outer transformation happen together. And as we grow our capacity and our desire to act for the well-being of the world, we find that our actions in both realms change and in all of the dimensions increase, including the fourth dimension. Next slide, please. This is nurturing life. This dimension of action includes all of our care work, from the very intimate scale to the planetary, from human to all our relatives, all the ways that we're growing new humans and growing the biosphere and regenerative culture, the micro and macro activism in so many ways. Nurturing life includes caring for ourselves, for each other, and learning to avoid the extractive approach that treats our own energy and time as resources to be used up. So instead of burning out, we need to nurture our bodies and our spirits and uphold each other for this long journey. And caring for ourselves is a revolutionary act. We resist the systems that teach us that extractivism is the way, and those systems that are ruining our earth. Next slide, please. So we can see in this graphic how these dimensions interweave and overlap. All of them are necessary, and they reinforce each other. And you'll likely find as you look at your actions or as you take new actions in one of the dimensions that it spills over into the others as well. These learnings about activism remind us we're not here to do everything, but rather to lend our own energies and gifts and passions in the areas and at the levels where they're most aligned, most sustainable, most nourishing, and most impactful. The key question that we come back to again and again is, what is mine to do? My community group, my people who I'm close to, what is ours to do? So I'll invite you now, all of you participating, to look at your own life and reflect, and then post some answers to this question in the chat, if you would. The question is, how's the great shift happening through me in each of these dimensions? So as you think of holding actions, shifting in consciousness, Gaian structures, and nurturing life, are there examples from your own life that you could categorize into one of these? What are these? So we'll have a look at the chat. Thanks, Karen, perfect. At the chat as you enter them. Share some examples of what you yourself are doing. Walking in nature with my grandchildren so they feel part of all life. Yeah. While people are thinking and perhaps posting, I think of some of my friends who participate in non-traditional, non-hierarchical arts activities like contact improvising dance. Here's another, helping our congregation understand the work that reconnects. Oh, Carter Edwards says, as her grandson, Nancy's grandson, I second that. Learning, writing letters to meetings with politicians. What else can people identify that's going on in your own life, small or large, that fits into these four dimensions? looking to activist friends for ideas and experiencing joy in camaraderie, facilitating dialogue and collaboration to address complex issues and wicked problems. Yes, bringing nature into art, volunteering for our organizations, political and social. An action club I discovered in semi-retirement has brought me the most change I've experienced in years, more than even living with the pandemic. To your words about the importance of community building. Yes, listening to centering the voices of young people. Favorite hymn, the Canticle of the Turning, being aware of our part in creation. Leading climate songs in my communities. Belonging to a spiritual community. So many. Yeah. Enjoying the wins we experience once in a while in the movement. Volunteering for an organization that purchases land to protect biodiversity. Digging invasive species out, picking garlic mustard, yay. A good chance to listen to the birds migrating through. Singing activist songs. Yeah, I would add singing songs during street actions changes the tone of the protest altogether. Practicing gratitude makes you aware, appreciate that we have so much. Participating in a men's circle. Yes, and all kinds of affinity groups where we can speak our truths. Meditation to keep balanced and grounded. There are many. Thank you so much. We could go on for a long time. And I hope that maybe, Karen, we may be able to harvest the postings in the chat and perhaps share them, make them available along with the recording afterward. Someone is mentioning immersive water therapies, working with others to educate, make a difference. Yes, all so important and all fitting within these kinds of dimensions of activism. So I'd like to draw this section to a close now. Oh, another one from Laura. Thanks, Laura. Getting scientists and artists to communicate about making a difference in the world, from Sean Thomas. Yeah. All of these learnings about activism carry us forward and help us see the big picture. How's our time, Tony? I wonder, would we have time for people to share some of these aloud, or should we move directly to the next activity?
I think that's really what the next activity is about. I think the going forth section, and I think there's time still. So Megan, I think you were going to lead that. It's really a good segue from what we've just been sharing.
Yeah, thank you. So our final section, I believe, or at least our next section, is going to be a little bit more of a reflection about what we discussed today and just going off of what Sally just shared with us. So we want everyone to really think and make conclusions about their own thoughts, about what your next step might be and who can I link with to make this happen. So kind of just making this conversation turn into a bit of an action step, make a promise to yourself about how you can contribute to this movement. So we ask that you write it down somewhere, that like in a journal, on your phone, wherever, or you can draw a picture, any way that you want to reflect on this.
There's a slide that goes with these questions that people might want to refer to.
Yeah, so we'll take a few minutes for everyone to reflect on this. And this is just really so you have something to take away from the webinar, some personal reflections. So number 1, what do I want to do for the sake of life on Earth? Number 2, what is the next step I will take? And number 3, who will I connect with to work together and support one another? Okay, so we're good to end the reflection session there. When you're ready, you can share in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you to share your thoughts out loud.
Thanks. I was thinking while we were in silence about the co-housing community. I'm my next step is going to be to put some of the other folks in touch with a person I met by Zoom recently who teaches sociocracy as a governance and decision-making method. And I'm going to do that. And the folks I'll link up with are some of the members of our group, the two who are organizing in membership with me mainly.
Thank you for sharing. Christina, do you want to go next?
I help people for a living, and I feel as though I want to do more of that. Because I feel as though that's where I'm most capable, and where I'm not so capable is talking to people. So I want to increase my ability and my confidence to talk to people, and to talk to organizations. Like recently I connected with the Diabetes Foundation to donate clothes. And to really help where I'm able to do so. Like I'm able to donate clothing and I'm able to donate money. My best source for connecting with people is my congregation, but also organizations, finding out how I can help within my capabilities.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's a really awesome point you made. I think it's important to recognize where we're able to provide the most support and then focus all of our work and time there. Before we move on to the next person, I'm going to quickly read out what Kathy said in the chat, just in case you haven't read that yet. So I will try to get more of my friends involved, get a little more creative with vegetarian cooking, and spend more time in nature. That sounds exciting. I want to try some more cooking as well, vegetarian meals. Bruce and Natalie, do you want to go next?
I have this feeling a lot now lately that, you know, when every time I go food shopping and I go into your typical grocery store or something, I just, I feel a bit like, you know, the expression from a book I read just recently, a man talking about the way in Nazi Germany, some people knew what was going on and kind of tried to do something about it, but, you know, also tried to stay out of trouble. They called him like a one-eyed man. So there's an awareness, but I'm not doing everything I should. And I kind of have that feeling like every time I'm buying some, you know, pepper that was grown in California and flown here or something, and I would love to disconnect from that somehow. So I'd love to be in a community where collectively we have the capacity to raise more of our own food locally, perhaps in, you know, in exchange with other communities, feed ourselves and live a life that's more connected to other people and to nature. First step on that journey, I think it's you know, starting by reaching out to other people who have a similar vision, one of whom I think might be sitting next to me right here. So
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And I'm glad you're making that step. But I also think it's important to recognize that we didn't choose to live in these systems. So as long as we're not feeling guilty about it, that's good. But doing what we can, making changes where we can within these systems. I'm going to read another one from the chat from Ron and Anne, or one of them, I'm not sure who wrote it. I will help teach people how to mend clothing, such as patch, darn, and sew buttons themselves at skills exchange events. well, I've never heard of darn before, so it'd be very interesting if you taught that. Kurt, do you want to go next?
Audio. Making an effort to let, sustainable stores and like maybe farmers markets and other more green areas know how to be more accessible. I find sometimes, some of the disabled and people in the blind community that I know, they sometimes find it hard to navigate through some of these places, like, knowing the ingredients and knowing where things are can be very difficult. So it's sometimes very discouraging for some people to go to these places.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm so pleased with the amount of different answers we're getting here. It's really awesome to hear what everyone's going to work on. I'm going to read another one from the chat from Nancy. Finding more ways to work together with our DMC partners, particularly on truth and reconciliation. I second that. I'm going to work on that as well. Who's next? I apologize. I have no clue how to say your name. D-E-I.
Deirdre or Dee.
Thank you.
Hi. That's why I usually just say it's Dee Dee. Yeah, I live in a remote First Nations community in Labrador at this time. And I'm on the recycling committee of my school, of the teachers. And because everything has to go on an airplane, not much is recycled. Most goes to the dump. And there's not much soil. It's rock and sand, and things aren't grown, and things don't grow in gardens. So there's not composting. So to figure out the best focus for my time, one of the things I do is I teach grade 1, and I'm trying really hard to talk about recycling and reusing and about plastics and how they affect the world and water pollution. And one of the things I'm going to do is we're learning to count by 5s. And in the community I am in, the cans and the bottles are worth 5 cents each. You pay a 5-cent deposit. So I'm going to get my kids to help me count up all the cans and bottles that we collect by 5, so we know how much money we're going to end up with.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love that idea. It's always super inspiring to hear about all of these ways that everyone's going to individually take action, because we know in the end it's all going to come together. And I believe Sally talked about this earlier, but the ripple effect. You may not know where that action's going to go. You may not see the direct effect right away, but you know in the end it's going to add to the movement as a whole. So thank you everyone so much for sharing. If there's any final thoughts you want to share, put your hand up now or type it in the chat before we wrap up.
One more in the chat, Megan, was about farmers markets starting up again this month. Did you read that one?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I can. Okay, so farmer markets are starting up again this month. I will attend as often as possible to support Ontario's organic farmers. The food tastes better there too, so it's a win-win, right? That's a great idea.
I think I'll bring us to a close by thanking our presenters, Sally, Megan, Tony, for doing a wonderful job of getting the dialogue going from to younger, older, people with different and yet similar experiences. So that's been great. And thank all of you for participating and sharing your thoughts. I'd just like to close with a blessing that that Sally shared with me. It comes from the Work That Reconnects. It's by Doug Hitt. May each of you, along with your loved ones, be safe and protected. May each of you, along with your loved ones, be happy in the moment by moment wonders of this planetary existence. May each of you, along with your loved ones, be unrestrained and unafraid in your expressions of grief over the suffering of Earth and her beings. Aware that acts of clear intention and love extend outward to countless future beings, may each of you, along with your loved ones, inhabit lives of meaning and purpose. With stars for ancestors, may each of you, along with your loved ones, come to know your true heritage, freedom, and power. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Do not carry a heavy heart. Do not carry such a heavy heart. For the weight of the whole dark mountain. Do not carry such a heavy heart. Do not carry a heavy heart. Do not carry such a heavy heart. For the weight of the whole dark mountain. Do not carry such a heavy heart. Do not carry a heavy heart. Do not carry such a heavy heart. For the weight of the whole dark mountain. Do not carry such a heavy heart. But in all its glory, river deep and ocean wide. 'Cause on this blue pearl that charms the moon, we are the turning tide. 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 We are the turning tide.